Okay, so just looking at some more research material here pertaining to the communitarian system and writers who promulgate these types of ideas, coming back again to Amitai Etzioni, who seems to be one of the main important voices pushing these types of agendas. Apparently he passed away a few years back, but a lot of written material by him can be easily found on the Internet Archive and in other spaces pertaining to this communitarian system and this subject matter. So I'm going to go over a little bit more of that here, and then from there provide commentary and intermittently also provide commentary on the written material here. So we'll go ahead now. And some of the passages I want to look at here, just starting out in chapter 3, this one entitled Too Many Rights, Too Few Responsibilities. Sometimes a finding, while of limited significance by itself, illuminates a broader issue, perhaps even an encompassing, debilitating deficiency. One such finding is that young Americans expect to have the right to be tried before a jury of their peers, but are reluctant to participate in jury duty. This finding illustrates a more general societal imbalance of a people that frequently opposes bigger government and higher taxes, but is anxious to expand or add governmental programs in many areas from child care to national health insurance. And there are many patriots who are proud of the U.S. show of force in the Persian Gulf, but who are simultaneously opposed to serving in the armed forces or sending their sons and daughters to serve. So this book was written obviously in the early 90s. So, around the time that a lot of the Gulf War, quote-unquote, situation was going on, a lot of deceit pertaining to that issue as well, but won't go into that here. Some feel so strongly about the primacy of rights and so resentful of the implications of social responsibilities that they are blind to the peculiarity of the positions they advance. The American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, for example, is opposed to searches in airports. The use of X-ray machines and metal detectors, which has significantly curtailed hijacking in the United States and reduced terrorism elsewhere. Okay, I think you know where that's coming from, right? So interesting that he was putting this type of thing out in the early 90s, trying to condition people to accept these ideas in the early 90s. Continuing on, that is, the ACLU opposes a measure that is minimally intrusive, i.e. only slightly diminishes, or as we shall see, reinterprets one's rights to travel freely, but which significantly enhances public safety. Yeah, public safety from what? Fake terror that you created? Or this is before, again, this is well before 9/11. But anyway, you can see how they were programming people and getting them ready for these things that they had planned in the future. So continuing, in a similar vein, Dr. Teresa Crenshaw, a member of the President's Commission on the HIV epidemic, was it really an epidemic, or was it? You got to go back and look at that situation and wonder how much of that was real as well, because there's a lot of similarities to what they were doing there, albeit on a much smaller scale than what we saw a few years ago anyway. This Dr. Teresa Crenshaw, member of the President's Commission on the HIV epidemic, found herself arguing against a common objection to AIDS testing, that there is no point in having yourself tested because there is no cure. This argument disregards the fatal effect on others who come into contact with the infected person. Sound familiar? And this is in the early 90s that he's putting this out there, kind of to condition people to accept these ideas. You understand how this works? It is akin to saying that if a man exhales cyanide, there is no sense in telling him of his predicament as long as there is no cure for him. Other radical individualists oppose seatbelts and motorcycle helmets, the war against drugs, innocent voluntary measures as the fingerprinting of children to help cope with kidnapping. Most Americans, however, are more reasonable. Are they, or have they just been brainwashed? They are willing to accept some limited adjustments of their individual rights and some enhancements of their moral and public commitments in exchange for improved public safety. Yeah, public safety from what? Staged events which you're going to be setting up in the future? Yeah, I'd say so, right? So we see here preparing people. We see him putting out these ideas to prepare people for things that they had planned, right? very clear here. I choose the term adjustments to reflect, first of all, that limited changes are at issue, and second, to emphasize that what some consider a diminution of rights, which, however small in the eyes of some, is viewed by others as threatening our basic freedoms, is seen by still others as merely a reinterpretation of recent legal traditions. Thus, while some consider checkpoints on public roads to search for drugs a diminution of rights, others call such checkpoints a manifestation of what constitutes a reasonable search. The Constitution bars unreasonable searches, but what is unreasonable is subject to interpretation. In either case, at issue is an adjustment in recent considerations of what is deemed legal and legitimate. So you can see he is clearly putting forth a lot of these ideas to normalize these things that they had planned with regards to the removal of basic human rights, the removal of basic freedoms for what they're telling you is more protection, more security, right? And you know where that comes from. That's all lies, but they were planning this for many years, and again, they were conditioning people back in the early 90s for these types of things, and even longer before that. So we can see that here in these writings. We'll continue on to the next passage. And this passage is called Suspicion of Any and All Government Authority. Beneath the opposition by radical individuals to all adjustments of individual rights lies their deep-seated suspicion of all governmental authority emanating from the days of authoritarian regimes. Jean Guerrero, an ACLU representative who opposes drug testing, cites Justice Finn. Okay, I'm going to cut that part. Continue on. However, if this viewpoint is to be applied to a functioning democratic government, if one plays on the fear that the nation might at any moment be overturned to a totalitarian movement, then one comes to quite untenable conclusions, including the refusal of any adjustment in constitutional rights, however compelling the social need. One ends up perceiving constitutional rights not as a basis for sound government actions, but merely as a protection against government. This position is reflected in the ACLU opposition to mandatory contact tracing for those infected with AIDS. Did you hear that? Let's go back to that again. This position reflected in the This position is reflected in the ACLU opposition to mandatory contact tracing for those infected with AIDS. Mandatory contact tracing. Sound familiar? So you see how they were preparing people for all of these plans, and they were putting it into this literature, and this comes back to the communitarian system and these ideas, all going hand in hand with what they planned to do back then. And it had been a slow process of subconsciously programming people to accept these ideas through the culture. By that logic, one can never act, because it is quite true that it is never possible to know with 100% accuracy what might occur at some point in the future. Yeah, like you could have some massive quote-unquote pandemic, right? Yeah, that could happen, yeah. You never know what could happen in the future, right? True, it is necessary to be attentive at all times to finding ways to bolster our freedoms. From providing civic education, many Americans still need to be reminded of the virtues of various items in the Bill of Rights, to imposing proper penalties on those who violate the law by unauthorized disclosure of information in government files. And that plays a major role in what they're doing now too, with this whole situation where they're telling you there's been all these supposed data breaches and people's personal information has been compromised. That all falls in with the agenda, because they want to push this digital ID system. So then they come in and say, well, these things wouldn't happen if you had a digital ID system, right? So they make it sound like they're doing it for humanitarian purposes and to help people, but really it's about enslaving people and removing rights. And that's what he's pushing here as well. And then going through some passages here from another volume from the same writer, Amitai Etzioni, who is an important voice with regards to these communitarian ideas. Again, he passed away apparently a few years back. This is a more recent book written in, published in 2001. So we'll go to the first passage here, Toward a New World Architecture. And interesting choice of words there. Architecture with regards to masonry, the builders, the architects, and of course the grand architect who they often refer to as the Grand Architect, being Lucifer, of course. But the reference to architecture and architects is often, associated with Masonry and Freemasonry. So it's not accidental that he chooses to use that word there. So toward a New World architecture, again, Freemasonry and the New World, the architecture, the builders. Ever since I was a student 50 years ago, references to world government or world community were dismissed as sheerly rhetorical, meaningless phrases, or worse, naively idealistic. They were treated as off-the-wall notions held by a few dew-eyed visionaries such as members of the United World Federalists and UN enthusiasts. This long and much dismissed vision needs now to be seriously re-examined. The reasons for this are numerous, but most come down to new manifestations of an age-old problem, that of alienation. Ever since the beginning of modernization, man has unleashed technological and economic forces that were supposed to serve him, but instead have lorded over him. So coming back to the technology here and what we see now with the literal technological enslavement, of course they're going to talk about this as if this is something that they didn't create themselves, right? So you understand what's going on here. Again, the problem has been created, and then he's coming through to provide all these ideas, which would be part and parcel of the Hegelian dialectic, with providing these solutions to problems that people involved in these organizations themselves created. Ever since, man has been trying to, quote-unquote, come out on top, to develop political institutions that would allow his values to govern, but all such efforts have largely failed. All too often, instruments twist purposes rather than serving them. Alienation's new form is the globalization of technological and economic forces that used to be mainly domestic. Collective self-determination, to the extent that it existed a generation ago, is increasingly threatened by transnational developments. Weapons of mass destruction and installations to build them are bought and sold across national borders. Hate materials banned in one country are easily reached via the Internet in others. Civil war in one country threatens others with massive immigration, which is difficult to curb by means which democratic societies find tolerable. Crime is increasingly organized across state lines and is on the rise. Women and children are sold into sex slavery and forced labor. National governments are helpless when a nuclear accident in Chernobyl rains radioactive material on their territories. A currency collapse in Russia, Thailand, or Indonesia rattles the financial markets of the world. A computer virus set loose in the Philippines causes worldwide disruptions. Supranational corporations shift capital and jobs from one nation to another, circumventing national policies. Although these problems and others like them differ greatly from one another, they have one common denominator. The national institutions that are supposed to express people's preferences in these matters are woefully inadequate in coping with them. Alienation has become distinctly international. So it's interesting, he brings up the example that hate materials that are banned in one country are easily reached via the Internet in others. So what he's hinting at is that we have to have a one world system to regulate all of these things, to determine what is right and wrong, what you should be able to see and what you should not be able to see, to determine what is quote-unquote hate and what is not. And obviously he wants that to be done through this huge collectivist system, which he claims is representative of the ideas of the people, but in reality is just representative of the ideas of the state, which controls these communities. So that example there is quite clear in showing that. And then he says, he brings up all these problems, which are obviously a lot of the manufactured problems, and then again he's hinting at we need to have, the solution is this one world system, this one world control system. Again, very similar to all of these other organizations such as the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, same ideas being put forth here. So he wants a one world system to be able to regulate all these things, to be able to regulate what is hate and what is not hate, to be able to regulate the moral comprehension of these quote-unquote communities, And of course, you're going to have these people within these communities, as we went through in part 1, these community leaders, quote unquote, pillars of the community, who are Masons, who are put in, and these are going to be the people to be the lead influencers within these state-controlled communities, which are already in place. They have all of this already set up. It's already very active. We're looking at a system now where all of this has already come into place. And but looking at this literature, you can kind of get an understanding of how it all came to be, and the ideas that were used to try and brainwash people into accepting this. And then it says the old international system is overloaded. And I'm going to go down to a specific paragraph here, which is very interesting. So to provide one illustrative example, the WHO, World Health Organization, was concerned that due to the internet, people have access to all kinds of sites that represent themselves as medical sources, but are highly misleading, if not dangerous. It wanted to formulate some standards such sources would have to follow worldwide. So in other words, the WHO is going to dictate what you can say with regards to any medical issue, so you're going to have to follow their guidelines, their standards. And you all know what the WHO was involved in just a few years ago. I mean, we all know about that. Anyone who has any sense knows how legitimate and reliable the WHO is. Wonderful people, involved in the WHO. And so that's a guideline there. He wants the WHO to be able to dictate any and all medical information online. He thinks that's a good thing. So you see here again, it's all just making excuses to go towards totalitarianism, and essentially this United Nations type of dictatorship, where these international organizations are dictating literally what is true and what is false. And we know how skewered their ideas of right and wrong are, and we know how tremendously debased and lost their comprehension of truth and falsehood is. So, I mean, he wants the WHO to be able to arbitrate. He wants the WHO to be able to determine any and all medical information that you find online. So that's what the information that this man's putting forth, and that's another one of his wonderful ideas there. Let's also keep in mind that this book was written in 2001, so long before all of the events of a few years ago. And again, he's just preparing people to accept that, to accept the WHO as being this all-seeing, omnipotent force in determining what medical information is true and false. He's preparing people for that, and he's wrapping it in this fake humanitarian gift wrap to make it seem like they're doing it for noble causes, when in reality it's all about easing you into this totalitarianism and this one world dictatorship. Supranationality defined. It is useful to think about supranationality as a composite of several elements. Hence, one cannot only have more of each element, but also a body that contains a large number of elements. One supranational element is the decision-making carried out by a governing body not composed of national representatives, a body that follows its own rules, policies, and values rather than being instructed by national governments. For an institution to qualify as supranational, its decisions must concern significant matters, because all international organizations can make some minor decisions on their own as long as they fall within the boundaries and limits set by the governments represented. This often allows them to move with more agility and speed than international organizations. Another element is that the nations encompassed by these entities, as well as their citizens and member units, such as corporations and labor unions, are expected to follow the rulings by these bodies rather than requiring separate decisions by the national governments whose people are affected. In addition, supranational bodies may have some kind of effective enforcement capacity of their own, such as the ability to fine corporations within the member states directly, or order them to desist from some action rather than fine the government or ask them to rein in corporations. That is, they have more bite than networks or NGOs. To put it differently, supranationality presumes some surrender of sovereignty by the member nations. Of course it does. That's what they want. Supranational bodies differ from TCBs in that they have several, if not all, of the powers of state. These may include the abilities to raise taxes, enact laws, enforce them, sign treaties, and so on. So you're turning that all over to one large international body. Sounds good, huh? Moving ahead to another relevant passage here. ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, is often characterized as a supranational body and one that has been quite effective in facilitating the Internet in select matters. So, you can see here in 2001 when he published this, he is preparing people for the digital ID system. That's what they're referencing here. It's very clear. When they refer to it as the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, because they want everyone to have that digital ID. And so, even back then, they were preparing people for it. And this literature clearly indicates that. So, Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers is often characterized as a supranational body and one that has been quite effective in facilitating the Internet in select matters. And that's the body that's going to regulate the Internet and everything that is done on it, obviously, because this was why, you must understand, the Internet was created to begin with. It wasn't created so that we'd have all this wonderful knowledge. So from day one, the Internet was created as a control system, but they had to get people to accept it by creating this system where you could share all these ideas and gain all this knowledge. They had to get you to like it. The same way they have to get you to like this surveillance state that they've created with everyone carrying recording devices where they can record their neighbors and rat them out for anything the state doesn't like, or have them stalk people and record these people who they're stalking. Really, they have to get them used to the phones first and give them all these things they can do with it to get them attached to it, right? Watching movies on it, things like that. These little perks, things to get you used to it and then to slowly get you to accept it. And then they eventually let you come to understand what it was really created to do, right? So while, of course, we find all this wonderful information online, essentially it was all created as a control system. You can even see that small logo when your Wi-Fi goes offline. It shows the symbol of a world, a globe almost in a cage, and how they reference the Internet as the World Wide Web. I mean, what do you think that's a reference to, right? So again, it comes back to this. It was all created from the very beginning. They knew that they were going to implement this system with the digital ID, but they had to take all this time to lead up to it to get people used to all the freedom first before they take away the freedom and say they're doing it to protect you from non-existent problems. So that's how it's worked, and we can see that all tying in with this communitarian literature once again. Just going to take a look at this short YouTube video, Understanding Communitarian Philosophy, Theory, and Criticisms. As they put it, educational video, and this is what they're just telling you, kind of a brief overview of this
Communitarianism. In this video, we will explore the concept of communitarianism, its history, and its key features. Communitarianism is a political and social philosophy that emphasizes the importance of the community over the individual. It emerged as a response to the individualistic tendencies of liberalism and libertarianism, which prioritize individual freedom and autonomy. Communitarians argue that individuals are deeply embedded in their communities, and that social and moral values are created and sustained through social interaction.
Okay. So again, they're telling you there that the social and the moral values are to be determined by the community as a whole, and more importantly that they will have these overseers in the community who will be dictating what these supposed, who will be dictating the moral framework that the others in the community should follow. And of course, as we know from the previous video, a lot of these people involved in these situations who are put into these positions to determine the moral comprehension of the community are quote-unquote pillars of the community. The reference also by Amitai Etzioni to architecture is not by accident. These are references to masonry, and these are the people who are going to have the most influence over these communities, and they in turn, those people, these masons in the community, they are going to receive instructions from the lodges, who in turn receive instructions from up above. So there's a chain of command in terms of the entire overall social influence of these communities, but he would have you believe that it's all just being done for, for the greater good of everyone, and that everyone really has some say in this. In fact, it's not true. In fact, it's dictatorial, and people are literally being told what to say and do and how to think. And if they don't want to follow these influencers who are put into these communities, then they will become socially ostracized. He's not going to tell you that. Amitai Etzioni is not going to tell you that, the writer of the literature that I went over, and of course the person who created this video is not going to tell you that either, because they want to gift wrap it and deceive people into thinking that this is a really wonderful thing for everyone involved, and that the people involved really have a lot of influence. In fact, they don't have influence. They are literally being used as pawns in these situations. So let's continue.
One of the key figures in the development of communitarianism is Alasdair MacIntyre. In his influential book, After Virtue, MacIntyre argued that modern societies suffer from a moral crisis because they have lost their sense of community and shared moral values.
So they have to have somebody to come in and dictate to them what is right and wrong, right? And that's where these pillars of the community come in. They will determine what is right and wrong, and they will be told what to say and do by these people up above them, right? To influence the community so that there is an overall control structure and a chain of command, a hierarchy, if you will, literally controlling these communities. But they want you to believe that it's all democratic, when in reality these ideas are really nothing more than rehashing of Marxist ideas and gift wrapping them and trying to make them sound beneficial for everyone, when in reality it's just the slow imposition of an overall enslavement and a total conformist society where everyone must conform to what the state dictates.
According to MacIntyre, communities play a crucial role in creating and sustaining moral traditions, and without a strong sense of community, moral discourse becomes fragmented and meaningless. Another important figure in the development of communitarianism.
Now let's take a look here, okay?
Is Michael Sandel.
Take a look at this here.
Sandel is a political philosopher who has written extensively on the role of community in political life. In his book, Justice.
So we're talking about this collectivist mentality where everyone has to do what's best for the community, and they're encouraged to do what's best for the community and follow these instructions, which they claim are based upon, a moral structure. Of course, they're not really telling you where that moral structure comes from and who is determining what that moral structure is based on. Now you'll notice here all three of these people have one common thing, one thing in common here. I think you can see what it is, right? So, the community will follow instructions whenever they're told to do something. They're all going to conform, and you can see they're all conforming here by wearing that facial covering there. Yeah, so we saw a lot of that a few years back, didn't we? A lot of conformity. A lot of conformity.
Sandel argues that the concept of justice is...
But of course, as they told us there, that was for the greater good of everyone else too. And you saw the whole communitarian ideology coming into play perfectly there. Because anyone who didn't follow along and conform was socially ostracized, treated like a pariah, and told that, they were endangering everyone in the quote-unquote community. So you understand how this works. It all falls into line with this same ideology here.
Is deeply connected to the idea of community. He suggests that we need to rethink our understanding of justice in light of the importance of community, and that we should look to the shared values and practices of our communities to guide our thinking.
Right, so our shared values. So in other words, if they tell you you have to do something to keep everyone safe, it doesn't matter what the truth is or what the facts are behind what they're telling you. You're just going to follow along, and you're going to put your mask on and keep everyone in the community safe. Otherwise, you're not doing what's right for the community, and we don't want you as a part of that community, and we need to ostracize you and treat you like a leper. Right? And that's what they're saying. Because you are an individualist, you don't want to conform to the practices of the community which are dictated from up above, clearly.
About justice. Communitarianism is often contrasted with individualism, which is the dominant ideology in many modern societies. Individualism emphasizes the importance of individual autonomy and personal freedom, and is often associated with capitalism and free markets. Communitarians argue that individualism can lead to a range of social problems, including social isolation, inequality, and a lack of social cohesion. One of the key...
Well, in fact, the opposite is true. In fact, social isolation comes from people being completely ostracized from these communities who dictate to people, who tell people exactly what to say and do, and if you don't conform, you will be socially ostracized. So this system itself is making people socially isolated, and that is all part of the framework. They're going to socially isolate people who do not conform. So again, the Hegelian dialectic comes back into play here. They are doing this themselves and then saying, well, you know, you'll be socially isolated if you're not part of a community. Yet they themselves are the ones who are going to kick these people out of the communities and treat them like pariahs if they don't conform to everything that they're told to do, put on masks, etc. Follow along with what you're told to do, with what the collective is doing for the greater good of everyone, or you'll be socially ostracized.
Key features of communitarianism
and
is
treated
the
like
idea
an
of the
outcast.
common good. Communitarians argue that the interests of the community as a whole should take priority over the interests of individuals. This means that individuals have a responsibility to contribute to the well-being of their communities, and that communities have a responsibility to provide for the needs of all their members.
Right, so you hear that. So the individuals have a responsibility to the community. In other words, you have to do what is right for the community, and you have to do what you are told. Put your mask on, do what's right for everyone. Otherwise, you will be socially ostracized. You will not be treated as a part of the community. If you are speaking out against any of these agendas and can think clearly and think critically and want to speak out against any of this tyranny, you will not be treated as part of the community, and your voice should not be heard. It should be censored, and that's what these people really believe. They're not going to come right out and tell you that, but when we look at Amitai Azioni's writing, even back in 2001, he's clearly hinting at what they plan to do with internet censorship. So there can only be one voice with regards to these activities. He doesn't want anyone challenging the voice of the World Health Organization. Only that one dictatorial voice can tell everyone what to do with regards to any medical situation, and this also comes into play with all other aspects of life too, which are controlled within these communities.
Communitarians believe that the common good can only be achieved through collective action and cooperation, and that social institutions should be designed to promote the common good. Another key feature of communitarianism is the importance
you see
of
they're all
shared
wearing their
values
face
and
coverings there
practices.
too. Being obedient to the
Communitarians
community,
argue
right?
that social and moral values are created
They're
and
all
sustained
following
through
along
social
and
interaction,
conforming
and
and
that
wearing their
individuals
masks.
are deeply embedded in their communities. This means that communities have a crucial role to play in shaping the values and practices of their members.
Right, of course. So they're going to dictate what the values and moral structure should be of the people who are members of this community. And that is going to be done by these overseers, these community leaders, these quote-unquote pillars of the community.
Communitarians believe that communities should promote values such as solidarity, cooperation, and mutual respect, and that social institutions should be designed to support these values. Communitarianism has been influential in a range of fields, including political theory, sociology, and philosophy. It has also been influential in practical politics, with communitarian ideas being adopted by political parties and social movements around the world. Communitarianism has been particularly influential in the field of urban planning, where it has been used to promote community-based approaches to urban development. In conclusion, communitarianism is a political and social philosophy that emphasizes the importance of the community over the individual. It emerged as a response to the individualistic tendencies of liberalism and libertarianism, and argues that individuals are deeply embedded in their communities.
Okay, so there you go. I mean, again, it's just basically a more simplistic summation of the ideas put out by Amitai Etzioni. We will cover more of Amitai Etzioni's material because it is very important, and he is a very important voice within these circles. So in conclusion of part 2, what we've come across here are the same ideas that are put forth by these international think tanks and these organizations like the World Economic Forum and the World Health Organization, overlapping ideas with these communitarian ideas put forth by one of the most important writers within regarding this subject, Amitai Atzioni. You see a correspondence of these ideas with what he was saying even back in the early 90s. A lot of these ideas are very similar, and we see that this system has come into place, and they want to present it, at least in his writings and that video that you saw, as being something that is democratic, as being something that is done with influence of the people, when in reality it's not really being done with regards to influence of the actual people within these communities. What is being implemented are the instructions from these overseers of the community, and they in turn are obviously receiving instructions up above to push all of these agendas, like some of these agendas that you saw a few years ago. We won't go more into that, at least on YouTube, but I will be doing some of the later parts for this series on some of the other platforms. I won't be putting them all on YouTube because we're going to have to discuss some of the deceit and manipulation, go further into that, and how far this system has been willing to go to deceive people who are not a part of it, including how the media and these public servants, who are also these overseers, which previously described, these pillars of the community, who get a lot more privileges than the average citizen or proletariat gets, how those people are interconnected with the media and with people who have signed on and become part of this communitarian system to create events involving mass deception to justify the removal of rights. A lot of it comes down to deceiving people into surrendering their basic rights and freedoms while lying to them and telling them that it's being done for the greater good and that it's being done for protection from either non-existent problems or problems that these overseers themselves have created. So that will do it for the second part, and we'll go. There's a lot more material to go into. This will be an ongoing series for me. Again, I won't be putting all of the parts on YouTube because there is some subject matter that we have to get into that they won't allow you to talk about. And I think you know the reasons why they won't allow you to talk about these things. Because this deceit permeates everywhere, and most of these quote-unquote, most of these platforms are controlled by intelligence agencies. So they want to push certain agendas, and they won't let you have any legitimate or valid discussion which critiques the deceit that is involved in those agendas. So that's it for part 2, and I'll be doing some more of the more for this series, but it will take time, and some of the subsequent parts will be on some of the other platforms which claim to be about free speech, which aren't really about free speech, but which give you the illusion of free speech. So at any rate, again, we saw the tying in of what they want with regards to dictatorial voices to control what is online, to control the flow of information, to control any criticism of these measures that they take. They want the WHO to be able to dictate everything, and they don't want people to have any type of voice to speak out about what they're saying, to speak out against these agendas. It is a dictatorial control system, and they're trying to mask it with this illusion that it's being done for the better good of everyone. Again, this ties in directly with these communitarian writings. We'll look at more of that in the future.